unpack these bigger structures and turning them into these smaller manageable chunks, right? Even when you spoke about, let's say, a student has this perception that math teachers are bad in high school, and you want them to elaborate on that, break that idea down. What do you mean by bad, right? And so you're moving from this world of black and white to this world of gray. So where bad can also mean good for someone else. Is that what you're trying to get them to understand, that there are these perspectives which shape your experience in a way? So my question is related to the that world of gray and how you found students deal with that, because writers are dealing with these worlds all the time, right? Where if you think of any movie, there is a protagonist who has an agenda, and the antagonist will have an opposing agenda, and it doesn't necessarily mean that one perspective is better than the other, right? So that can be a really freeing world for some people to live in, but for others it can be mind boggling. Have you ever experienced a student having trouble dealing with multiple perspectives? The idea that there is no right and wrong.
No, I won't agree with the last statement. There is right and wrong. Not to, take very simple.
Morally?
No, not to take a simple moral view, but I feel like through this act of thinking and deepening your thought, you realize that, okay, certain positions feel more right, or there is more substance or more justification for why those positions can be taken, right? Yes, it's not simply about your moral belief or conviction. You're right that as students move from thinking that, oh, my maths teacher was so bad, to, okay, maybe my maths teacher felt a lot of pressures because of which they struggled in the classroom, or maybe they didn't get good training because of which they struggled. And as they try to write about all of it together, you might feel that, okay, am I being too nice to my maths teacher? My maths teacher is also responsible for being a bad teacher. And that's where you have to take a position, right? That do you call out the maths teacher, or do you call out the maths teacher and the system which trains the maths teacher? And maybe the better position is the second one, right? Because that then helps you understand that, okay, the maths teacher is not operating alone. So I do believe that in this sort of movement towards more complex thinking, you learn to judge what feel like stronger positions, not just based out of your conviction or belief, but based on research, based on actually considering multiple perspectives. And yes, this may differ from individual to individual. You're right that students will sometimes struggle as they move through the grayness or the complexity or things getting more complicated, right? Sometimes it's just at the level of reading. Like, okay, the more I'm reading, the more confused I am, right? Because I thought, I could just write about how my maths teacher is bad, and now I can't anymore, because I've read so many accounts.
There's no one else to blame but you.
And so there is that sort of process of being confused, of being puzzled, of being overwhelmed, of feeling annoyed that why can't I hold on to a simple position anymore, right? But through this process, the idea is to arrive at a position that you want to prioritize also, right? Now, yes, you can't possibly include all perspectives, but you learn to compare perspectives, and you learn to also, in that sense, find your voice and find your authentic, let's say, judgment of a particular situation, right? And that's a tough process, let's face it, and that may be a lifelong process, But I do feel like at every point as you're writing, you're arriving at slightly more, perhaps, evolved positions. If you're stuck at the same position all your life, I don't know. You may still continue to believe certain things. So, for example, I will continue to believe that, let's say, everybody, not just a privileged few, should receive a quality education.
Yeah.
I believe that, right? That for me is an ethical sort of view. Um, but with time, my understanding of how institutions work and what needs to be done to make this happen will change, right? Like when I was like 18 years old, I thought if the teacher taught better in government schools, things would get better. You know, a little later, I thought that, okay, if there's more funding for public education and for if all schools and colleges were well resourced, it would make a difference. And now I think that okay, it has to be both and more, right? And this sort of understanding of a reality keeps deepening. And for me, that discovery is happening through writing often, right? But one more thing I want to say about what happens in the classroom. I think what I was saying is that it's like in every class, writing serves as a metaphor for some act or practice that we do, right? So organization was one example, but it's also, let's say, synthesizing different ideas together. It's also inventing concepts that perhaps will help us understand the reality better, right? Sometimes it's also about how the use of language is really connected to our relationships, right? So sometimes it's a reflection on that. Now, all of it is happening under the broad theme of education. And my course is actually titled Education, Literacy, and Justice, right? So it's about how all that we do in education, from reading to writing to speaking to each other to becoming friends to learning how to apply what we learn in our professional lives to positions we hold about society to political affiliations we have, right? All of it is something we reflect upon through the metaphor of writing, through the act of writing, right? And then writing is something that's connected to reading, to listening, to speaking, to thinking, to figuring out, even non-verbal things. So, for example, let's say I'm feeling uncomfortable in a classroom because of somebody who sits next to me and is very cold towards me, right? Or because of a power hierarchy in the classroom, right? Somebody comes from a very kind of rich family and acts all whatever.
Yeah, they have a fancy pen and
Yeah, or perhaps are more arrogant or speak up in class a lot. That act of writing, if I ask the question that, how do you feel? And you try to write it, you're now reflecting on that emotion. And then you're reflecting on why that emotion exists, right? So, yeah.